The modern world is obsessed with labels and clear-cut categories. We divide people into groups based on their preferences and build entire social systems around this. But if you tried to explain these concepts to an ancient Roman, he would simply laugh in your face.
Larger one will be perfect.
To the rulers of half the known world, our modern terms would sound like utter nonsense. The Romans did not understand the concept of a partner's gender in the way we do. Their framework was built on a completely different and far more rigid logic. In ancient Rome, there was only one rule that truly mattered. And this rule was determined not by romance, but by cold, calculating power. It sounds rather strange to us today, doesn't it? But it was precisely this system that kept Roman society from descending into chaos for centuries. Imagine a modern corporate hierarchy where your status determines absolutely every action you take. For the Romans, this hierarchy permeated even the most intimate spheres of life. A Roman citizen could do practically anything as long as he remained at the top of this food chain. The main thing was to never relinquish control to anyone else. Otherwise, the consequences would be simply catastrophic for his future career. In this video, we'll examine the specific laws that strictly regulated these invisible boundaries. We'll look at the scandals involving emperors who shocked their contemporaries precisely because of their voluntary weakness. You'll learn why the modern view of antiquity is one big, naive historical illusion. This will be a journey into a harsh world where power was the primary and only social currency. Fasten your seatbelts because we're heading out onto the streets of real ancient Rome. Losing status in Roman society meant more than just public condemnation or bad rumors. It was political suicide, which permanently closed the doors to the Senate and respectable society. For a Roman man, the loss of power in any sphere was tantamount to the loss of his very essence. Modern politicians lose their careers due to ill-advised remarks or high-profile financial scandals. The Romans, however, lost everything because of an inappropriate social role behind closed doors. For a long time, many historians shamefully hid these facts away in dusty university archives. In the 19th century, translations of ancient texts were often subjected to strict censorship due to the puritanical views of the Victorian era. Scholars literally crossed out entire pages, trying to make Roman history fit their moral standards. Because of this, for centuries we studied a distorted and sanitized version of antiquity. But the true history of Rome is far more complex, brutal, and interesting than any modern fantasy. But things get even more interesting when you dig into the original ancient texts and court records. It turns out that the Romans didn't even have a word to describe modern sexual orientations. These concepts were only invented in the late 19th century by European psychiatrists. The Roman language used entirely different terms that described exclusively active and passive behavior. It was a world where actions mattered far more than personal feelings. Today, we judge people by whom they choose as their life partners. In antiquity, society judged you solely by the role you played in the process. An active role was always associated with masculinity, absolute dominance, and full civil rights. A passive role was considered the lot of dependent people who were deprived of a real political voice. And mixing these two worlds was strictly forbidden by strict unspoken rules. My grandfather used to say that true strength is always tested by one's ability to withstand any blow. For the Romans, strength was tested by the ability to never allow others to land that blow. A free Roman citizen was expected to project his authority everywhere and at all times. Any deviation from this ironclad rule was viewed as a direct threat to the very foundation of the Republic. And this is no exaggeration, because people who broke the rules instantly became outcasts. Modern science, which studies social structures, fully confirms this interesting historical phenomenon. Sociologists call this power asymmetry, where relationships are built solely on domination and submission. The Romans didn't read clever modern books on sociology or complex human psychology. They simply intuitively built an empire on the right of the strong to dictate their terms to everyone else. And this pragmatic system worked flawlessly for many hundreds of years. Imagine a society so obsessed with status that it even prescribes it in the bedroom. The Roman Empire was a massive machine where every person occupied a strictly defined cog. At the top of this pyramid stood the free adult male Roman citizen. He was an absolute king and god within his home, in his circle. The law protected his body from any encroachment from the moment he came of age and received his toga. Now think about how a modern large corporation functions. You have a CEO, middle managers, and ordinary rank-and-file employees. No one expects the CEO to mop the office floors of his own volition. For the Romans, relinquishing one's dominant role in a relationship was akin to such mopping. It was perceived as a voluntary and inexplicable humiliation of one's own high status. But here's what's truly surprising about this entire ancient value system. It didn't matter at all to a Roman citizen exactly who he shared his bed with. The partner's gender was irrelevant as long as that partner was of lower social status. Slaves, former slaves, prostitutes, or foreigners were considered perfectly acceptable choices for a noble Roman. The only strict condition was that the citizen must always remain the dominant and active participant. It sounds like complete anarchy, but in reality, it was the strictest of orders. This system was called the penetration paradigm, and it governed all of Roman society. The point was that the penetrator always held power and inviolability, and the one being penetrated was automatically recognized as a person of a lower class or as property. Modern sociology calls this a physical expression of social domination. If a Roman citizen voluntarily accepted a passive role, he committed a crime against his status. Roman law had a specific concept of infamia, which translates as public disgrace or dishonor. A person branded with infamia was deprived of the right to vote in elections and to speak in court. He effectively ceased to be a full-fledged citizen and became a political ghost. It was a social death that terrified the Romans far more than actual physical death. Modern personal development coaches teach us to step out of our comfort zones and be flexible. Roman senators would simply have driven such a coach out of the city with sticks. In their world, flexibility was seen as synonymous with incredible weakness and moral decay. A man was expected to stand like a stone column, never bending under any circumstances. Any hint of submission to anyone would immediately provoke ridicule from the entire vast city. That is precisely why enemies often tried to accuse politicians of passive behavior in their youth. It was the simplest and most effective way to destroy a rival's career in an election. Mark Antony publicly accused the young Octavian Augustus of having gained power through the bedroom. And this was not an attempt to expose him as homosexual, as many mistakenly believe today. It was a direct accusation that Octavian behaved like a dependent slave. Let's draw another simple, everyday analogy from our own time. Imagine that a presidential candidate voluntarily works as a courier in his spare time. Today, this would be considered a charming quirk or a PR stunt to connect with the people. In Rome, such a candidate would immediately be stripped of all possible civil rights, because a leader has no right to demonstrate subservience, even as an innocent joke. Scholars long struggled to understand why Roman satirists mocked such people so viciously. Poets like Martial left behind hundreds of epigrams ridiculing citizens for their hidden weaknesses. But they were not laughing at the mere fact of same-sex relationships, but at the violation of class boundaries. To them, a free man in a passive role looked just as absurd as a dog meowing like a cat. It was a glitch in the very fabric of the Roman world order, one that demanded immediate correction. It turns out that Roman sexuality was merely an extension of the Roman war machine. They conquered other peoples on the battlefield and then applied the same logic within their own homes. You were either a conqueror who dictated the terms or a vanquished who meekly accepted them. A third option simply did not exist in the mind of the typical inhabitant of the Eternal City. But for this system to work, it had to be protected by special and very harsh laws. Any complex state system requires strict legal mechanisms for protection. The Romans understood perfectly well that social ridicule alone would not be enough to control society. As Rome transformed from a small city into a vast republic, old customs ceased to work. Therefore, around the 3rd century BCE, the so-called Law of Scontinius appeared. It was one of the most mysterious and misunderstood legal documents of antiquity. Modern historians have spent decades trying to unravel the true meaning of these ancient paragraphs. For a long time, it was believed that this law prohibited same-sex relationships in principle. This is exactly how Christian monks interpreted it during the Dark Ages. When values had changed drastically, monks projected their religious prohibitions onto the ancient era, distorting the document's original intent. But when archaeologists began studying original legal practices and inscriptions, a completely different picture emerged. It turned out that the ancient Romans were concerned with matters quite different from those of medieval priests. The Scantinius law had nothing to do with morality as we understand it today. Its sole purpose was to protect the bodies of free Roman boys from the advances of other citizens. In those days, sexuality was closely linked to the concepts of power and social status. What mattered was not what a person did, but with whom he did it. The state sought to preserve the physical integrity of those who were destined to rule the country in the future. Think of it as a strict rule of an exclusive, closed-door elite club. Club members can do whatever they want with the staff or random passers-by outside the establishment, but they are categorically forbidden from assaulting other members of their own privileged circle. This rule protected the internal stability and dignity of society's very top echelon. Violating this boundary was perceived as a direct insult to the entire state system. Roman lawyers protected future senators and legionaries from losing their status and dominance. A boy born free was considered the inviolable property and pride of the Great Republic. Any encroachment upon him was equated with the desecration of state property. The Romans believed that a future ruler must not experience humiliation in childhood. His will had to remain steely and unshakable from the very moment of birth. The penalty for violating this law was an astronomical sum of 10,000 sesterces. To give you an idea of the scale, an ordinary Roman legionary earned about 1,000 sesterces for a whole year of hard service. With that money in those days, one could buy several good slaves or a small plot of land. It was a colossal financial blow that could instantly ruin even a well-to-do citizen. The state was literally telling its citizens that messing with future rulers was too expensive a pleasure. Such a severe financial threat worked in Rome far better than any long moral sermons. The Romans were a very practical people and valued their money and influence above all else. Losing one's fortune meant losing one's standing in society and the respect of one's neighbors. Therefore, the Scantinius law was an effective deterrent for the most hot-headed individuals. Everyone knew that a momentary lapse could deprive them of their inheritance and their children's future. But here lies the main pitfall for the modern human perception of this situation. The law of Scantinius protected only those young men who bore the proud title of full citizens. If a boy was a slave or a foreigner, this law absolutely and categorically did not apply to him. Under Roman law, a slave was considered simply a speaking tool or a thing devoid of rights. He could be treated however one pleased, and the law saw no problem with this. Roman law simply did not consider such people to be subjects worthy of state protection. By the standards of ancient Rome, modern laws on universal human rights would have seemed like a ridiculous and foolish joke. The entire system was built on harsh inequality and a clear division of people into categories. Some people had the right to protect their bodies, while others were merely a resource for the needs of others. This was the cruel reality of the ancient world, which is difficult for us to imagine today. A lawyer I know once said that laws always reflect the deepest fears of a particular society. Rome's greatest fear was that a future soldier would grow accustomed to the role of a submissive and weak subordinate. A young man was supposed to grow up to be a ruthless and self-assured conqueror who would bow to no one. If he were psychologically broken in early childhood, he would never be able to effectively command legions. The state guarded his natural aggressiveness as carefully as the empire's gold reserves. To emphasize the child's status, the Romans even used special external symbols. Freeborn boys wore a special amulet around their necks called a bulla. This gold or leather case served as a visible sign that the child was under the protection of the Scantinius law. It was a kind of warning signal to all the adults around. Upon seeing the bulla, any citizen understood that this child belonged to the untouchable caste of rulers. Interestingly, severe punishment was applied to both parties if they were both citizens of Rome. The adult man paid a huge monetary fine for his illegal and brazen encroachment on another's status. And the young man, if he consented to it voluntarily, received that very terrible mark of shame. He lost his status and was forever deprived of the opportunity to hold any public office. It was a civil death, after which a person became an outcast in his own city. Roman society did not accept any excuses based on youthful naivety or the mistakes of youth. You were born to be a future ruler of this world, and therefore you were obligated to conduct yourself accordingly from your earliest years. The responsibility for preserving honor rested on the young man himself and his parents. If the family failed to protect their son's dignity, they brought eternal disgrace upon themselves. In the eyes of the Romans, such a person forever lost the right to command others. Modern psychologists would call this the most brutal and constant social pressure on a child's fragile psyche. Imagine that from the very cradle, you are taught the necessity of always and everywhere being the one in charge. You have no right to show weakness, give in, or hand over control to others even for a moment. It was precisely this constant internal tension that forged those very iron-willed Roman generals. They carried this harsh life experience from their homes to the bloody battlefields across Europe. The Scantinius law was rarely applied in courts because the mere threat of punishment was too great. However, it was sometimes used as a powerful political weapon against very troublesome or dangerous rivals. If an influential politician needed to be removed from the scene urgently, he could be accused of seducing young citizens. This was the ancient version of today's high-profile scandals, which can completely destroy a person's reputation in a single day. The evidence was often circumstantial or questionable, but the very fact of a trial ruined a career forever. Ultimately, this law became the very invisible framework upon which Rome's civic pride rested for centuries. It drew a clear line between those who ruled the world and those who were ruthlessly ruled. This legal mechanism helped preserve caste purity and the upper class's confidence in its superiority. And this brings us to one of the most scandalous and intriguing stories of the entire ancient world. The story of a man who broke every possible rule but still managed to become a great legend. We will talk about the young Julius Caesar and the rumors that haunted him throughout his life. Julius Caesar went down in history as Rome's greatest military commander and unchallenged dictator. We know him as the ruthless conqueror of Gaul and a brilliant military strategist. His name has long been synonymous with absolute power and unshakable state authority. Few of the rulers of antiquity could match him in political foresight and cunning. But at the beginning of his brilliant political career, he found himself at the center of a massive scandal. This scandal was so explosive that it nearly buried all his ambitions forever. And it was not linked to mere corruption, but to a diplomatic trip to distant Bithynia. In those harsh times, reputation meant absolutely everything to a Roman aristocrat. The slightest stain on the honor of an ancient family could put an end to any political aspirations. The young patrician was about to learn this cruel political lesson the hard way. The young Caesar was sent to the court of King Nicomedes to resolve simple naval matters. He was tasked with assembling a fleet to aid the Roman army in its latest military campaign. However, his mission dragged on for a suspiciously long time, which immediately raised questions in the capital. Malicious tongues began to whisper actively about the reasons for such a delay at the wealthy Eastern court. Soon, persistent rumors spread throughout Rome that the young diplomat had become the king's favorite. And the most terrible part was that the rumors attributed to Caesar precisely a passive role. For a proud Roman aristocrat, this was an accusation worse than treason or desertion from the battlefield. The Romans sincerely despised those who voluntarily surrendered control of their bodies to another man. All the more offensive was complete submission to an Eastern ruler, whom the Romans considered effeminate barbarians. Such a shameful stigma threatened to forever close the doors of the Republic's high society to Caesar. Caesar's political opponent, the famous orator Cicero, mercilessly attacked him in his public speeches. He sarcastically called the dictator the Queen of Bithynia and made scathing jokes about his shadowy past. Other influential senators also did not miss an opportunity to take a jab at the young politician at every turn. The dirtiest insinuations about lavish feasts and royal chambers at the court of Nicomedes were brought to bear. Defending himself against such vile attacks was incredibly difficult due to the complete lack of direct evidence. Imagine modern presidential debates where one candidate ridicules the other so harshly. In ancient Rome, Such public insults were the absolute norm of everyday political struggle. It was a time-tested method of destroying a sworn enemy and depriving him of the support of ordinary voters. The city crowd adored such sordid scandals and relished the juicy details with great pleasure. Caesar had to constantly defend himself and categorically deny his connection to King Nicomedes. But the most interesting events took place during the triumphal processions following Caesar's great victories. A Roman triumph was the highest honor for a commander in the moment of his almost divine earthly glory. However, an ancient Roman tradition strictly permitted ordinary soldiers to sing satirical songs about their beloved commander. This was done specifically so that the triumphant victor, buoyed by his success, would not imagine himself equal to the gods. And Caesar's legionaries marched through the streets of Rome, loudly singing a very specific song. They shouted to the whole city that Caesar had conquered Gaul, but King Nicomedes had conquered Caesar himself. The soldiers literally called their invincible general the husband of all women and the wife of all men. These mocking lines rang out over the crowd of thousands, provoking bursts of laughter from the ordinary townspeople. It sounds like a complete and utterly unacceptable lack of respect for the commander-in-chief of a massive army. In any other army in the world, soldiers could have been mercilessly executed on the spot for such brazen behavior. But in Rome, this was perceived as a peculiar ritual for relieving intense social tension. The soldiers reminded the dictator that despite his greatness, he too was vulnerable to popular rumors. This demonstrated the paradoxical, democratic nature of the relationship between the ordinary legionnaires and their aristocratic leader. Nevertheless, Caesar hated this particular song more than any other mockery from his political enemies, because it struck at the very heart of his status as a free and dominant citizen. Think for a moment about how paradoxically Roman logic worked in this case. No one in the vast Senate was in the least bit outraged by the mere fact that two men were spending time together. Ancient morality viewed such relationships quite calmly, provided certain social rules of the game were observed. What drove them into a genuine rage was that a Roman citizen had voluntarily submitted to a foreign monarch. This fundamentally undermined the very foundation of their rigid worldview and their boundless imperial pride. Rome was always meant to dominate the entire world, not act as a submissive servant. A true Roman was simply obligated to dictate his harsh terms to conquered peoples and vassal kings. Caesar's mistake lay not in his partner's gender, but in the grossest violation of imperial subordination. By surrendering himself to a foreign ruler, he symbolically humiliated the entire great state. That is precisely why an innocent diplomatic rumor proved to be such a destructive weapon against the young patrician. Modern PR managers would have spent millions of dollars to cover up such a massive scandal. Caesar had to prove his ultra-masculinity for the rest of his long life. He deliberately engaged in countless high-profile affairs with the wives of other influential senators. This was his aggressive way of showing society that he was the absolute alpha male and a predator. Ironically, his ostentatious debauchery served as the best defense against accusations of passivity and weakness. Similar vile rumors often dogged other great Roman generals in their youth. It was a completely standard political cliché used to discredit overly ambitious people. If a capable man rose too quickly up the career ladder, he was always accused of such a sin. The logic of the street mob was extremely simple and cruel. He must have sold his body to a more powerful patron. This ancient propaganda worked just as effectively as modern fake news on the internet. Caesar's story perfectly illustrates just how fragile reputation was in ancient society. A single careless diplomatic mission could forever brand you with a vivid mark of indelible shame. And even the successful conquest of half of Europe could not completely erase these rumors from the public memory. In harsh Rome, one had to constantly prove one's authority through bold deeds, a stern gaze, and every public move. Any hint of submission to anyone remained an indelible stain on the snow-white senatorial toga. The great Roman general spent his entire life doing everything possible to appear as a flawless leader. But while Caesar spent his entire life trying to wash away these sordid and unpleasant rumors, a few centuries later, a man ascended the throne who made weakness his goal. This emperor turned all Roman traditions upside down and shocked the empire. His reign became the most incredible slap in the face to classical ancient values. It is time to talk about a mad teenager named Elagabalus. Over the long centuries of its existence, the Roman Empire saw many strange, cruel, and downright mad rulers. Caligula, in all seriousness, appointed his favorite horse as a senator, and Nero played the lyre unconcernedly during the Great Fire. But none of them evoked such widespread and sincere social revulsion as the young Emperor Elagabalus. This Syrian teenager found himself at the very pinnacle of absolute power, entirely by the whim of capricious fate, and he methodically used this incredible power to completely destroy the very foundation of the Roman worldview. From the very beginning, the origins of this eccentric young man had already aroused serious suspicion among the traditional capital's nobility. Elagabalus was the hereditary high priest of the Eastern sun god in a distant and obscure Syrian city. He arrived in Rome in triumph, dressed in a completely exotic Eastern costume, lavishly adorned with heavy gold and sparkling jewels. His excessively flashy and provocative appearance alone caused great irritation among the conservative and strict Roman senators. For centuries, the patricians had been accustomed to stern military commanders in simple white togas, not to flamboyant Eastern priests, but his daily behavior behind the closed doors of the luxurious imperial palace was a true cultural and political shock. Elagabalus did not merely prefer the company of attractive men, which in itself was not a major problem for Rome. He declared quite publicly and with immense pride his desire to be exclusively the passive partner in these relationships. For the traditional Roman understanding of gender roles, this was an absolutely unthinkable and unheard of scandalous statement from the mouth of a legitimate ruler. The supreme leader of a vast, powerful state openly acknowledged his physical submission to the humblest of mortals. Imagine a situation in which the supreme commander voluntarily and joyfully surrenders himself to his own rank-and-file soldiers. To the haughty and proud Romans, Elagabalus's behavior looked precisely like such a shameful and utterly unbelievable act of treason against the state. He officially married his most athletically built bodyguards and held incredibly lavish wedding ceremonies. During these boisterous celebrations, the extravagant young ruler insisted on being called an empress and a lawful, faithful wife. This definitively and irrevocably destroyed all the sacred authority of the supreme power in the eyes of the stern Roman military commanders. Many well-known ancient historians write in detail, with undisguised indignation, about the most insane ideas of this strange Eastern teenager. They claim that he even offered colossal sums of state money to the best surgeons for the most complex sex change operation. This was not merely a playful, youthful extravagance or a fleeting whim of an incredibly wealthy and all-powerful man. Such a mad desire was viewed by society as a direct and very crude insult to the entire sacred Roman masculinity. Nature itself had endowed him with a strong, masculine body, which meant he was bound by blood to always rule and dominate ruthlessly. The most powerful and influential man on the entire planet consciously renounced his boundless power for the sake of shameful physical submission. Within the traditional and rigid Roman paradigm of penetration, this completely and permanently shattered the very structure of the unshakable cosmic order. By definition, a legitimate Roman emperor must always be a penetrator in every possible sense of the word. He must powerfully penetrate hostile foreign lands with invincible legions and relentlessly dominate all conquered subjects. Male natural aggression has always been considered the most important and reliable driving force behind the entire state apparatus of the ancient world. Through his daily provocative actions, Elagabalus quickly turned the highest office in the world into a pitiful object of public ridicule. The common people on the filthy streets of the capital began to compose filthy, mocking verses about their sovereign, quite openly and without fear. The once great authority of the Senate and all key state institutions plummeted rapidly against the backdrop of these endless palace follies. Great Rome, which had once conquered half the known world, suddenly found itself under the rule of a man who enthusiastically played the role of a submissive concubine. The proud and warlike empire simply could not physically afford to endure such an incredibly humiliating situation for too long. Modern qualified doctors would surely call this complex psychological phenomenon gender dysphoria, or a severe search for one's own identity. We are fortunate to live in an era when such complex issues are actively researched by science and are often met with deep understanding by society. But in the ruthless and harsh 3rd century AD, Kind and compassionate psychologists simply did not yet exist. Surrounding the unstable young emperor were only legionnaires hardened by brutal, bloody battles and cunning, cynical politicians. They were completely indifferent to the subtle emotional struggles and rich inner world of a confused teenager from distant, sunny Syria. To the seasoned soldiers and noble Roman senators, the emperor had simply turned overnight into a filthy, unworthy, and despicable slave. In their rigidly structured worldview, a free Roman citizen could under no circumstances ever act in such a humiliating manner. Under no conceivable circumstances was Rome prepared to silently endure such a blatant humiliation of the supreme divine authority. In the dark corridors of the palace, a grand armed conspiracy began to rapidly take shape, aimed at immediately cleansing the desecrated high throne. For many patriots, saving the state's violated military honor became far more important than any oath of loyalty to the legitimate ruler. My late grandfather always liked to repeat a wise rule of life: one must never appear weak before those who bear arms. Elagabalus completely forgot this golden rule of basic physical survival and began to behave openly like a stereotypical spoiled woman. He painted his eyes in incredibly vivid colors with fragrant Eastern incense, constantly wore lavish women's wigs, and meticulously removed all body hair. The mad young man even managed to set up a sort of real brothel right inside his own gigantic imperial palace. There, he personally and with great pleasure received high-ranking clients, competing with ordinary street workers in his professional skill. The seasoned senators literally gritted their teeth in undisguised anger as they watched their official leader gleefully grovel before his servants. Every mandatory official Senate session turned into unbearable mental torture for the proud old Roman aristocrats. They were forced to bow low and respectfully to a man who, day after day, and with deliberate intent, disgraced the very title of Roman patrician. The entire system, painstakingly built over many hundreds of years, exclusively on the law of the strong, physically rejected such a profoundly unnatural ruler. The air in the vast capital was literally saturated with fierce popular hatred and a deeply unsettling anticipation of an inevitable bloody denouement. The inevitable end to this wild and scandalous story was entirely predictable and extremely brutal in both scale and execution. The elite Praetorian Guard, which by the duty of its service was supposed to defend the emperor at the cost of its own lives, simply staged an armed mutiny. The 18-year-old Elagabalus was mercilessly and swiftly killed right in the palace lavatories, along with his domineering and influential mother. The enraged armed soldiers showed not a shred of mercy toward the man who just yesterday had been officially hailed as an inviolable deity. It was a spontaneous and bloody act of brutal mob justice against the foremost traitor to the traditional, austere ideals of manhood. The mutilated corpse of the young man was dragged for a long time through the dirty streets of the capital, to the delight of the raging crowd, and then contemptuously thrown into the Tiber River. The Roman Senate, with immense and undisguised relief, officially subjected him to the harsh legal procedure of total condemnation of his memory. Trajan is quite rightly considered one of the 5 greatest and best emperors in the entire long history of Rome, and no one condemned him for his choice of partners, because he always remained a strict dominant figure. This is a perfect historical illustration of the fact that gender was completely irrelevant as long as absolute power remained firmly in the right hands of the predator. But what was life like for ordinary people in their everyday and frankly boring ancient lives? How were these brutal concepts of power universally applied in ordinary Roman homes and on the dirty, dusty streets? Their unspoken laws operated every day, full of cynical and utterly ruthless double social standards. Let's take a look into the dark alleys of Rome and examine the lives of those who had no rights. If you were not a free Roman citizen, your life became a struggle for survival. For the vast majority of people in the empire, the rules of the game were completely different and very cruel. Slaves, foreigners, and prostitutes existed outside Rome's moral and legal compass. Their bodies did not truly belong to them. They were merely tools for their master's pleasure. In this dark realm, there were no concepts of consent or modern human rights. Slavery in ancient Rome permeated absolutely every sphere of everyday human life. Slaves cleaned houses, prepared food, taught children, and satisfied their master's every whim. A Roman citizen had the legal right to use his slaves as he saw fit. In society, this was not considered adultery or any kind of moral failure on the part of a man. It was viewed as the normal use of one's lawful household property for its intended purpose. Think about how we view buying a new TV or smartphone today. We use these things as we see fit, without giving a second thought to their inner feelings. This is exactly how the Romans viewed slaves in the context of their physical and intimate needs. Using a slave of any gender for pleasure was simply a demonstration of the master's status. No one condemned a person for disposing of their property within their own home. Interestingly, there was an entire beauty industry catering to young slaves of both genders. Wealthy Romans bought beautiful young men from Greece or Syria for incredibly large sums of money. Such slaves were called delicates, and they served as a symbol of their owner's highest status. Today's wealthy buy luxury sports cars or massive yachts to flaunt their success. Roman patricians bought beautiful slaves to show off their wealth to all their neighbors. But what happened when a slave gained his freedom and became a full-fledged Roman freedman? This is where the most complex and convoluted ancient legal balancing act came into play. Technically, a former slave gained rights and could no longer be used for his master's pleasure. But in practice, many freedmen continued to provide services to their former masters. The social stigma of the past always hung over them, preventing them from becoming truly equal. Prostitution in Rome was completely legal, widespread, and subject to state taxation. Brothels operated openly, and their clients were men from all walks of life. Both women and young men, usually of slave or foreign origin, worked in these establishments. For a Roman, visiting a prostitute of any gender was considered normal and perfectly healthy behavior. The main thing was not to spend too much of the family's money on this pastime. A friend of mine once said that double standards are the foundation of any stable society. Rome was a living, monumental testament to these very harsh double standards. Society demanded absolute chastity from the wives and daughters of Roman patricians. Yet at the same time, it gave men complete carte blanche for any extramarital entertainment. And this carte blanche included relationships with men of lower social standing. This system was incredibly cynical, but it functioned flawlessly for centuries. It allowed men to fulfill any fantasy while preserving a rigid family structure. The Roman family existed solely for the purpose of producing legitimate heirs and transferring property. Romans usually sought love and passion outside their official family unit, and this division of roles helped the empire maintain strict order and discipline among its citizens. It is very difficult for modern people to accept such a cold and calculating logic of human relationships. We are accustomed to associating physical intimacy with love, affection, and romantic feelings. For the Romans, it was simply another mechanism for demonstrating power and social hierarchy. They viewed the world as a vast arena where everyone was required to know their exact place, and violating these invisible boundaries was punished much more severely than many criminal offenses. When we try to judge the ancient Romans by our own standards, we are making a huge mistake. We are projecting our own fears and insecurities onto people from a completely different era. The Romans were neither better nor worse than us. They were simply playing a completely different game, and the rules of that game were written in blood, power, and ruthless social domination. That is precisely why their civilization became the most powerful in the entire history of the ancient world. Let's summarize this long dive into the psychology of the brutal ancient world. As we've seen, Rome had no concept of homosexuality or the heterosexuality we're accustomed to. These terms simply would have made no sense to legionnaires or stern senators. In their complex framework, there were only predators and those they hunted, and every free citizen was obligated to remain a predator until his very last breath. Contemporary debates about Roman morals often devolve into a ridiculous tug-of-war over history. Some try to prove that Rome was a paradise of free love and absolute tolerance. Others claim that it was a bastion of strict traditional morality and family values. But both sides are deeply mistaken in their naive and unrealistic assessments. Rome was neither one nor the other. It was an empire of absolute and ruthless power. When we read about Julius Caesar's scandals, we must understand the context of that era. The soldiers mocked him not because of his sexual orientation, but because of a loss of social control. When we are horrified by the fate of Elagabalus, we see the self-defense mechanism of a vast state. The empire simply cast aside a ruler who refused to bear the heavy burden of male dominance. It was a cruel, pragmatic, and incredibly effective system of survival in a harsh world. The law of Scantia clearly shows us how the state protected its golden gene pool. Protecting young citizens from subjugation was more important than any abstract moral principles. These boys were meant to grow into men who would conquer Britain and Egypt. Their aggressiveness and independence were cherished as the most valuable weapon of the invincible legions. And this strategy truly allowed Rome to dominate all its neighbors for centuries. On the other hand, we saw the Romans' cynical attitude toward the lives of ordinary, powerless slaves. Double standards allowed citizens to do whatever they wanted to those who were weaker. This shatters any romantic aura that Hollywood often creates around antiquity. Life in Rome was magnificent only if you were at the top. For everyone else, it was hard labor and constant service to the interests of others in power. A historian I know likes to say that the past is a completely different and foreign land. There, people do things differently, think differently, and judge others by entirely different standards. Trying to force our modern labels onto the Romans is like playing a game of broken telephone. We take their complex concepts of power and simplify them to the level of primitive talk shows. In doing so, we rob history of its true depth and genuinely daunting complexity. The next time you hear heated debates about morality in ancient Rome, just smile. Now you know that behind all these beautiful myths lies bare sociology. It all boiled down to who gave the orders and who was obliged to obey them unquestioningly. It was a world where status mattered more than love, and power was valued far above any passion. And it was precisely this cold pragmatism that allowed them to build the roads we still walk on today. Studying real history teaches us one very important and useful skill. It teaches us not to judge our ancestors, but to try to understand the logic behind their strange actions. The Roman system of domination seems savage, cruel, and utterly unjust to us. But it was precisely this system that forged the civilization that laid the foundations of modern Europe. Their laws, their architecture, and their military science grew out of this cult of absolute power. Perhaps in 2,000 years, our descendants will be just as surprised by our habits. They will laugh at our attempts to classify people according to such strange criteria, and they too will make their own videos to explain our foolishness to their contemporaries. History is cyclical, and we are all merely temporary passengers on this vast ship. The key is to maintain critical thinking and always look at the root of any problem. I hope this journey into antiquity has made you look at familiar things in a new light. We've debunked many myths and seen Rome as it truly was, unvarnished, uncensored, and free from silly modern attempts to moralize about it. This was a story about power, strength, and rules that almost no one talks about today. See you in future episodes where we'll continue to uncover the most amazing historical secrets.